Today we'll be concentrating on giving you a framework to answer Paper 1, Question 2, the language question. This session is to complement your lessons with your teachers and not to replace them in any way. The purpose of this nugget is to build on the previous nugget for this question and show you how to respond to the question and construct an answer. And then we'll be looking at how our response then fits in with the mark scheme, just to really show you the clear view of how to respond, but most importantly, how do we pick up those all-important marks that we desperately want. So if you remember the previous nugget, we looked at and recapped our extract that we had worked on before. And then I reminded you of the three-step process of this question, because it's always good to have a reminder for this. Then we looked at our previous answer. And now, as I said, this was a good answer. There was nothing wrong with it, but the whole purpose of this nugget is to improve and enhance our answer and take our response to the next level so that we can be really secure in our response and we get those all-important marks. We then looked at a different example from the text, and we looked at the idea that there was some auditory language or some sensory language that we'd found in there. And we tried to make sure that we looked at, this is what we did very well with this response, is we looked at what the characters felt and the characters' response. And what we were trying to do with our new response, and this is what we went through, is the idea of the reader. We did previously mention it maybe once and maybe twice in the previous paragraph, but this is something we really need to make sure we're getting into our response, because this is where our golden marks are. And I've had a bit of a run through of the top things to look at, and we looked at the why. So what's the writer done? Then we looked at the reader effects, and then we should be drilling down into those specific words or phrases that a writer has used, because this again is where we get some golden marks. Okay, so taking what we did last time and all of our notes about this. Now, obviously, in the exam, you are not going to have as much time to prep this answer. But the whole point of these nuggets and the whole point of practicing is that the more you practice this skill, the quicker you're going to be anyway. And at the moment, if you're doing the revision at home, which obviously is key and is going to be really helpful, you can spend more time planning a response, and then you can marginally get that down every single day. No one's expecting you to go from a 20-minute plan to a 2-minute plan in the space of 2 days. That is not going to happen. It's worth spending time on practicing the skill and planning a response before you write it now, so that by the time you get to the summer exams, you're able to do this in just a few minutes. If you remember, this is an 8-mark question, so you've only got about 10 minutes to plan and write a response. So the idea of these nuggets is that as you go through each one, we get the skills embedded, you practice them, and then, as I said, in a few months' time, you'll be able to answer those questions much quicker than you are now. And I'm sure your teacher will also support you with that and give you some practice questions should you need to. With language question 2, the skill, as I previously mentioned, the skill for this question is also used in other questions. So this is the skill that we need to make sure that you are getting down and very comfortable with. Anyway, back to what we were doing. So we're going to take this plan and we're going to turn this into a paragraph that would go with our response. Now, the idea of our paragraph is that we want to make it seem, we want to make sure that we're really clear that we've got all our plan into our response. So we need to make sure that we're answering the question. So we know our question is the idea that suspense is created. So as long as we can look at that, as long as we get this in there, then we know, our examiner knows that we're referring back to the question. So our first sentence, we want to make sure we include that. So the writer uses, because we're going to use our auditory language, uses a range of auditory language to create suspense. So immediately we have said what's been used, and we've also linked to the question. So our examiner knows, yep, they're answering the question already. The rest of their paragraph is going to answer the question. So we know that we're on the right track. It also will make you almost as a reminder for you, that that's what your answer should contain and that is our focus. So to create suspense for the reader. There we go. The first part is done. Link to the question. Then what we need to do is use our quotes. So we've got a couple for this one. So we've got a stair creaked. And we will also, let's use the mouse one. And squeaky mouse scurried. That's a lovely quote. There's loads in there, you can do alliteration as well, but let's not get carried away with ourselves. If we use that, we could also use the ticking of the clock. There's a couple in there, we know that because we picked them out. We'll come back to that later. We're going to use the ticking for something else in our paragraph. So we've got our link to our question, we've got our quotations. Now we need to think about what this actually does, because this is all very well, but this is not really what we're aiming for. We want to make sure we're answering that question. More importantly, so that we can answer the question, we need to make sure we talk about the reader and the writer. So we need to make sure that's in there. Otherwise, we're not really answering the question, or we're not answering it well. So these imply that the character, we're going to have to mention the character because obviously this is what's happening to the character. The character is in silence, hearing noises, because that's what auditory language is. We know that, that's why it's been used. Hearing noises that wouldn't normally be heard. And this is showing their fear. Because they're waiting, aren't they? They wait for something to happen. As they wait for something to happen. Okay, so we've explained it. This is our basic PE. So we've got our P, we've got our E, we've got our E. That's pretty basic. That would get us some marks. That's fine. The whole point of this nugget is to enhance our answer. So now we're going to link this to our reader. So as a reader, we anxiously await what will happen next, because we don't know what's going to happen next if the characters don't either. What will happen next for the character? And then we must link it back to the question. So this is creating an uneasy suspense as we are unsure what is next for them. As I said, the character doesn't know, we don't know. So we have now taken our response to the next level. We've now thought about, as a reader, in some detail. It's not as detailed as we could go. We're not going super detailed right now, but we have already enhanced our answer from our previous nugget. We've already looked at in some detail, the reader's response. And if we take that just a little step further, if you remember, I said we need to look at the words or the phrases that are used, because that shows that we're really analysing that language. So let's use the word ticking. Now, we didn't use it up here, and that's okay. Let's have this quote from the ticking of the clock. So the word ticking, it doesn't have to be this word. It can be anything you think that you want to talk about, because as I said in the previous nuggets about what you have a bit of an advantage of is that you can pick the specific words. No one's telling you what words to pick, and that's a real power that you have. So whatever you think about those word choices, you can write. And that's going to get you those marks because it's showing that you're analysing the language, and that's really important. That's a bit like your superpower. So the word ticking emphasises just how silent the environment is with every tick of the clock, because that is what's ticking, remember. And this is where we start to be a bit like superheroes, because now you can think, as I said, as your superpower, you can think about, well, what does that make me think of? Now, for me personally, the ticking of the clock, it's almost like their heart beating. And if that character is really afraid, they're in suspense, then we're definitely in suspense. And that is what the writer wants. So it's reminiscent of the character's own heart beating. That tick, tick, tick he hears over and over again. That's like his heart beating fast, isn't it? And maybe the more ticks there are, the faster his heart goes. Her heart beating, much like the readers, we have to link it back to the reader. Much like the readers as they await the fate of the character. There we go. Now that is quite a long paragraph. I realise that. But what we have got is we have got everything in there. We've got our point. Okay, we've got our idea, our link to the question. We've got our quotations. We've got what that means. We've got then a bit of analysis. We've then taken the analysis a step further and talked about words or phrases that have been used, all amongst the idea of the reader as well. And that's really, really key. And if we look back on the mark scheme, have we made sure we've got a clear understanding of the language? Well, yes, we have. Have we clearly explained the effects? Well, yes, we have. Okay, this is obviously not a full response, but we have got textual detail and we have got subject terminology. So if we use that throughout our whole response, that is what we're going to aim with. Okay, so we're going to end up with. It may even be creeping into this, depending on what the rest of the answer is. But this would give you secure. We want to aim for this part of the mark scheme. We never want to aim below, because then we're secure, we're up there. We know that the grey boundaries change year on year. So if we're up here in every single response, we know we're going to be safe. And we're always aiming for more. Why wouldn't we? So let's get as much as possible. And if we can use these things, and it's about the clear. If we're clear about it and we've got an explanation, we're going to get here. Okay, and that's what the aim is. We want our response to be clear, don't we? Now I'm going to leave you with a practice question. I did show you this in the previous nugget. Obviously before you were planning it. Now you're going to turn it into a response. And I'm sure if you give this to your teacher, they'll be really happy to mark it for you and give you some feedback. Remember what I said, language is all about practicing that skill. So annotate, analyse, and then turn it into the beautiful paragraph where all your hard work is shown within those sentences.